Hello, everybody. Let's see. Have we got the guest of honor here yet? Yeah. Well, we got his chair anyway. That's close enough.
I'm here, mate. I was just, I cracked open a bottle of mead and I had to go give Margie a glass of it, otherwise she gets pissed off. So I got mine, so we should be good to go now.
All right.
Oh, I've been on call all weekend, so this evening I get to have a drink. So cheers, everyone.
Let me turn my. Probably too loud. What do we got? Oh, we got 7:01. We are right on time. I bet you more people will drift in the next couple minutes. But first, I wanted to share a little something what I've been doing. My wife and I, we got a GoFundMe going on. And I want to put the link in the chat. What we've been doing is, there you go. Is there's this mother and with her 7 children between 3 and 13 years old were displaced and are starting over from scratch with everything. And my wife and I, we've got her a house, and she has seen the house. The mom of the 7 kids has seen the house, and she's expecting to move in with nothing. But what we're doing with this GoFundMe is we've already purchased her a minivan to fit all our kids
on Start TV,
and we are furnishing the whole house. We've got all the furniture, all the beds. We've got them a lot of clothes and toys and everything else. So I just wanted to put the GoFundMe out there to hey, is everybody here? If you all share it to your Facebook page or whatever else, get more people, more eyes on it, the more we can do for this family. So that'd be great.
That's awesome.
So that link is in the chat. So other than that, there's a bee meeting. How's everybody's bees doing? I finally got out there today. It's a nice sunny day, out in the sun all day, working, doing yard work, and watching the bees go around. Worst year ever for me, as far as if I go percentage wise, is, I've lost all my bees before, but that's when I've only had, less than a dozen hives. But if we go, as far as I've had a lot of hives, like this year in my 1 yard, I expected 20 hives to get through winter. I had 2.
whoa,
That's bad. And going through them, they are completely out of stores. And I feel like I had a lot of honey on every hive. I had an extra super on every hive, and I do that on purpose every year to make sure they have what they need. And I don't know if they've been robbed out, because this is the first time I've actually gone out and look at them. Have they been robbed out this spring, or have they been robbed out in a few days, scattered days? We've had hot weather. I don't know.
I've had the same experience, Bill. My loss is usually less than 5%, and so I have 4 yards. 2 of my yards had no losses, thank God, so they all made it through. But the home yard, which has about 70 hives in it, I lost 8 out of 70. So 11% for me is disgraceful in that yard. That's far worse than any other year I've had in the last 5 or 6 years. So I lost 8 out of a total of 94 colonies, but still, I mean, that's a lot higher than previous winters, and that's just starvation. I mean, it's my own stupid fault, bad beekeeping. You look through these hives and they're dry, and that was preventable. So, I mean, it was just an unusual winter, right? Warm, cold, warm, shitty fall last year too. We got very little flow because of all the rain, and just the perfect storm. And then you throw in some lazy beekeeping from me, and I lost more hives than I should have.
All right. I should say, with my losses, I usually get about 30 to 40% loss every year, just because I don't treat. So there's a big difference between me and what other people do. So
Right.
I've lost 2 out of 9. And I was out looking at my bees today, and boy, are they bringing in pollen like it was, like they were on fire.
Yes, suddenly today everything is in bloom. We've got tulip trees in bloom. We've got the little blue flowers in the yards. I don't know what they're called. You know, the dandelions are everywhere.
I got no dandelions, you lucky buggers.
Oh, they're here.
I'm getting syrup from somewhere. They're getting nectar from somewhere. I was yesterday shaking bees below. You know, some of the hives ended up going into winter with mediums, which I really hate. I like my hives to just double deep for winter, but some of them went through with mediums. Ones that I'd left on last fall, hoping to get some fall honey, and we had that crappy fall, and they were half full. I just left them on. So I'm shaking those bees down to the boxes below because obviously I've got nukes to raise and queens to rear, and I need deep frames. I don't need medium frames. So I'm shaking them down below excluders, and there's a ton of nectar coming out of the frames as I'm shaking them. Tons of it. It's like raining down nectar. So they're getting it from somewhere. We've got swarm preparations going on already, so you know, it should be a bumper year. Hopefully the weather will cooperate. Certainly, I've got plenty of feed coming in now. I don't know where they get the nectar from.
Yeah, I expect it to happen fast. So for me, Aaron, you're a little quiet. I don't know if is anybody else hear him okay?
How do I turn the volume up on that? I'm not sure. I mean, I can set
He is a
close
bit
to it.
quiet.
How do I adjust the volume on the microphone? I'm using my laptop. For whatever reason, the home computer's got shitty reception. I'm not sure why.
Well, that's better. You just get closer to it.
Yeah, I'll just sit closer to it, mate. That's not a problem. You'll be
There
seeing
we
my PowerPoint, not my ugly bald mug here in a minute anyway, so you'll be all set
Yep.
there. This apple mead is spectacular. You guys should make it.
You invite us all out. We can have a tasting.
There won't be any left by the time you get here, mate. Actually, I made about 6 gallons. This one's really good. All right, shall I kick this off, or do you want to wait a bit more?
Yeah, go for it. You should be able to share your screen, and if not, we'll try to figure it out. Otherwise, go ahead.
Under note, how do I? Oh, share screen down the bottom there. This one. Can everyone see that now? If I put the slideshow on from the beginning.
Yeah, looks good.
Good.
So I don't know what you guys managed to see the last talk, but I'm computer impaired. Like my computer skills are atrocious. So this time around, I enlisted the help of my 12-year-old, and he showed me how to put a backing on this and actually how to add some sound to it as well. So I got a few sound effects in here just for, you know, pizzazz it up a little bit. Let's see if it'll work. So let's try this. How's that? Can you hear that or no?
Here, I couldn't figure out what it was though.
Okay, shut up already. I don't want to keep it playing. Okay, that's not good. Let's just go forward because I don't know how to stop it once it starts playing. Did you guys hear the music or not?
No music.
Oh, it was Queen. It was really good too. All right, anyway, I don't know how to shut it up now, so it's going to keep playing, so I can't get back to that slide. But anyway, we're going to talk about queen rearing today, guys, or at least how I do it, and lots of other techniques for queen rearing that I don't use, but we'll go through a whole bunch of them. Same thing I said last time, I'm just a hobbyist like the rest of you guys. I do raise a ton of queens every year from my own yards and for making nukes and, you know, for other folks and things. So I've had a modicum of success over the last few years using primarily Michael Palmer's techniques, but I'll tell you how I do it and why it all works. And, you know, for those who watched the last talk, I kind of like all the minutiae of beekeeping. That's what I really enjoy, this the academic physiology stuff and why things work a certain way. Just how my brain works, I guess. So essentially, this first slide will tell you everything about the background of why and how we raise queens. I mean, basically, you are manipulating the behaviors of the bees based on manipulating their ability to communicate with pheromones. If you do that, you manipulate their swarming and their emergency responses, and that's what triggers them to raise queens for us. And there really is. This is, in a nutshell, the central concept that drives all of the techniques we use for raising queens. It doesn't matter if you're doing queenless splits, or if you're grafting, or if you're ecosysteming, or however you choose to do it. The way this works at its core is you are interrupting or manipulating the pheromonal communications, and by doing so, you are stimulating these various responses the bees have to that various levels of pheromone milieu, and that triggers the response to make queens. All right, so I did steal some pictures off the internet because, you know, I don't have a ton of photos of this stuff. I'd hoped to do this talk a bit later, so I'd have photos of this year's actual queen raising process, but, you know, my first graft won't be until this on the 1st of May. I have done a whole bunch of prep work already. The donors and the drone donors and all the rest of it are all going, and I'll tell you all about that as we go through. All right, I didn't invent any of this stuff. This stuff is freely available to all of you through YouTube, through talking to other beekeepers, through watching video talks, lessons, all that kind of carry on, reading books. You know, talking to experienced beekeepers. There's a chap in our group called Mike Bassett. If you get a chance to talk to Mike, he's forgotten more beekeeping than I've learned yet. He's an old boy. He knows a ton of stuff about bees. So, you know, it's talking to folks like Mike that really help, though. You learn a ton of stuff. Let's see if this one will work. How good is that one? So, yeah, it's not quite true that the male's penis explodes during sex, but you get the general gist of it. He doesn't do well after that he mates. But I think it's funny. He says it doesn't matter. At least he got, you know, anyway, let's move on. Why do we raise queens? Well, because it's fun, right? It's a hobby. Raising queens is really fun. Ian Stepler's a guy I listen to a lot, you know, the Canadian beekeeping blog. Watch a lot of his videos, listen to what he's got to say. He's another guy that looks at the minutiae of beekeeping. I think that's really cool. And he talks about beekeeping primarily as just moving boxes around, right? You're taking boxes on, putting boxes off, whatever you're doing, moving them in and out of the shed. It's essentially a hobby that involves lifting a lot of heavy boxes. Well, that gets old after a while. There's only so much entertainment you can get out of lifting boxes up and down, at least in my experience. So raising queens is sort of another aspect of the hobby, which is quite fun. Besides that, queens are expensive, and if you've got 90-odd hives or more than that, it's bloody expensive to requeen that many colonies. You know, 40, 50 bucks for a queen is fairly pricey. So if you can raise your own, it's a bit cheaper. You also then have some control over the genetics in your apiary. Although, you know, it is important to remember there's two parts to the baby, right? So you've got to control the male input also. So if you're going to control the queen that you're choosing your eggs from, you need to also choose the drones that are going to mate with her as best as you can, right? I mean, you can't have 100% control of that unless you're going to do artificial insemination. We'll talk about that later. But to the extent you can, you should be trying to control the drone pull also. All right, I talked about this last talk, so apologies if anybody who saw the last talk is seeing some repeated information. There are a couple of slides that are the same. This request I get every year, and I did this year as well. Can I breed purebred bees? I don't. I could if I wanted to without artificial insemination, and frankly, I don't want that. I'm trying to create hybrids that have a net that's superior to the sum of all its parts. You know what I mean? I'm trying to create a bee with good traits from all the different queens in my apiary, and I have queens from all over the place. Every year I bring in a handful of queens from various breeders around the place and add them to the apiary. It's fun. Again, it's a hobby for me, and also it's a chance to add a little bit of genetic variation, which is always cool. I have queens from all over the place, and you know, each year I just pick my best survivors to be my queen donors, my drone donors, my starters, my finishers. Wow, that's super loud. Whose mic's on? Might want to mute your mics, boys and girls. So this year I've got some stock coming from Hawaii, and you might think, why in the hell would you buy queens from Hawaii? That doesn't make sense to bring them to upstate New York. Well, Joe Latshaw's got some really cool bees, but Joe's only now selling breeder queens. You know, $600 or $700 for one queen is a little bit too rich for my blood. So the crew out in Hawaii have Joe's stock. They buy the breeder queens and they graft from them and they raise the daughters out there. So I'm getting some queens from there just to add some of Joe's stock into my yards. I think I've got 6 of them coming this year, about 5 or 6. All right, more benefits of raising and selling queens and nukes. Well, swarm prevention is a good one, right? If you're raising queens and getting rid of extra brood frames so your bees don't swarm, you know, and you've got to get rid of them somehow, otherwise your program comes to a screeching halt because you run out of equipment. So as you're raising your queens and using brood frames up to make up your mating nukes or your small nucleus colonies, you can sell those off and get a bit of money for extra bee toys, which is cool. Gives you more space in your hives, gives you swarm prevention in the big colonies by pulling them back a little bit. And also you're rotating frames out, which is a good thing too. You don't want frames, at least I don't want brood frames in my apiary that have been in there for 10 plus years. So every year pulling frames out and putting new foundation in means that you're giving away relatively new frames with the nukes, and you're also putting new frames into your hives every year. So there's a few benefits to doing it. And again, at the core of this, raising queens is just a really fun thing, which hopefully I'll show you during this talk and you'll be all motivated to have a crack at it yourself. The other thing is if you have your own queens and you have nucleus colonies in your yards, you don't have to buy bees anymore, and bees are freaking expensive. You know, we're talking about the loss of bees that people have every year, and this year does seem like a bad year, but if you've got more queens and more bees, then it's not really a big deal, is it? I mean, I said this last time, I think the biggest assets that we have in our apiaries are the comb, not the bees. You can always make more bees. Combs cost a ton of resource, you know, they take time and honey and bees to make. But once you've got the comb, making queens and throwing a frame of cat brood in there with a shake of bees and you're good to go, they'll build up again. As long as you've got comb, they'll build up quickly. All right, so this is what nucleus colonies look like when they leave my yard, and it's going to be a hectic time from here on in as the nukes go out. They start going out this weekend, actually. So it's just a cardboard box, right? So a waxed cardboard box with the bees inside of it, and I tape down a little bung in there to stop the bees getting out in people's cars. All right, sorry about that. I got a bit carried away with the sound effect. But it's funny, though. I think that's the last one. I think we're good now. Oh, well, there might be some more. I'm not sure. So why do I raise my own queens? We talked about it before. It's fun. Controlling the genetics is kind of a cool thing. It's cheaper than buying in queens. You know, I try and load the deck in my yards as much as I can by flooding my yards with only the drones from colonies I want to propagate. The same with queens. I'm pretty selective about where my queens, the queen mother will come from. You'll have seen the last talk, a pretty aggressive culling program. Like I squish queens left and right if they're no good. I just squish them and replace them. Another benefit of raising your own queens, you don't have to accept mediocrity, right? If your queen's no good, you squish and put another one in. It seems a bit barbaric and a little inhumane, but you know, you've got to have a quality control measure somewhere. And that's what we tend to do, right? If the colony fails, you blame the queen. And it may not always be the queen, but certainly that seems to be the starting point. Kill the queen, replace her, and see what happens. All right, and again, down the bottom there, you'll see it says there's no point having crappy bees contributing gene pool. What I mean by that is, if you've got marginal queens, they're going to pass on marginal genetics to your lovely new virgins that you've just spent all your time and effort selecting. You don't want that, so go ahead and kill any crappy queens. Kill off the drones of any marginal queens. Kill off the drones of any queen that's not in your selection. So within my apiary every year, out of my survivor stock, right? So this year I got whatever it was, 80 some colonies through winter. I go through, I say, who had the traits that I want for a queen donor, who's going to be my egg donor, and I'll select 2 or 3 queens that I think are the best throughout the course of the previous season and over the winter. And by this time of the year, I've narrowed it down to 1 or 2 queens. And I'll have 2 self-starters going, so I'll run 2 queens at a time. And I've also selected the next tier of 10 to 15 colonies at each apiary where I'll say, well, these were the best of the remaining 20 or whatever it is at this apiary, and those are going to be my drone donors. Everybody else, the drones get culled. Every other colony in those yards, the drones are culled off. I just cut the drone comb up, every single colony, except for the ones that I'm going to allow to make drones. And even that doesn't guarantee you're going to get a mating with that drone, right? You could still get a feral colony with your neighbors' drones or whatever. But it's as best you can do without either living on an island or doing artificial insemination. I think this is about as close as I can get to selecting the drones and the females. All right, but you do have to cull aggressively, otherwise you're wasting your time, really. Okay, why would one cull a queen? Well, queens are expensive. Why would you kill them? Well, because they're not doing what you want, right? Maybe they build up slowly. That's not always the queen's fault. I talked about this in the last talk as well. Apologies, I don't want to repeat myself for those of you who watched the last talk, but I equalize in April once. Meaning I go through a hive that only has 1 frame of brood, and the next one has 4, they get equalized. As best as you can. And you say, why the hell would you do that? It's not always the queen's fault that they limp out of winter, right? I mean, sometimes it is. It's not always. Sometimes it's that equipment had a leak and they got cold from the other hives. Maybe there was mice. Maybe there was just poor mite treatments didn't work as well on that hive. For whatever reason, they ran out of food, whatever it was. Maybe it's not the queen's fault that hive's not looking fantastic this time of the year. So I equalize them once, but if they all start at the same point, and as we go through May and June and July, heading in toward the honey harvest, if they're lagging behind, I don't waste my time on that queen. I cull her and I replace her and see how that new queen does through the winter. So these are the reasons I may cull out a queen. If they came through tiny and I'm convinced that it's the queen's fault. Non-frugal overwintering, I really hate it when the bees use all of their resource up, especially if I've left them heavy and there's nothing left. That bothers me, so those queens don't get propagated. Poor honey production, obviously, not keeping up with the other queens in the yard. Swarming behaviors are low because I make a lot of nucleus colonies up and I'm always queen rearing. I'm always pulling frames of brood from these colonies. So I'm pretty good at swarm control, but, you know, they still swarm occasionally. But swarmy bees, you don't want bees that romp around all over the frames while you're trying to handle them. Running and pouring off your hands and falling on the ground. I don't want bees like that. I don't like aggressive or defensive bees. Again, because it's a hobby, I think from what I've read, the aggressive bees produce more honey. But for me, this is for fun, and so I really don't have any interest in bees that are trying to light me up every time I go in the yard. I would colour queen for a crappy brood pattern, as long as I don't think this is hygienic behaviour. Do I need to explain the liquid nitrogen test, or is everyone pretty well up to the play on that? For telling, hygienic versus crappy bees.
I've never heard of it.
So, John, the way this works basically, mate, is your hygienic bees will remove dead brood very rapidly. And it's a good surrogate marker for how they would remove mite-infested larvae. And it turns out the correlation is quite good. So basically what you do is you get, in this one they're doing it kind of fancy. This photo I stole off of the university website. But what they're using here is a piece of PVC. That's what the black tubing is. And they've kind of buried that down to the foundation, right? So you've isolated that little circle of capped brood. And they're pouring about 50 or 60 cc's of liquid nitrogen straight onto the top of that brood. And they leave it there for, a minute, whatever, 30 seconds, a minute. You tip off the remainder, and then you just leave it till it thaws out, and you take your little plastic piece out and you put the frame back in the hive. You basically killed that circle of brood, completely dead, because you froze it, right? Liquid nitrogen is pretty damn cold. So you freeze and kill that brood, you put it back in the hive, and then you come back and see 24 hours later how many of the cells have been cleared, and a hygienic queen will remove every single one of them. Every single cell will be empty. Her bees will have cleared all the dead larvae. And non-hygienic bees, maybe even a week, 10 days later before they've cleared the dead brood out. So if you've got a spotty brood pattern and you're not sure if it's a crappy queen or a hygienic queen, in other words, her bees are removing infected larvae, which is a good thing, that would be a reason you'd want that queen, not that you'd want to kill her. You do a liquid nitrogen test, and getting liquid nitrogen is easy. At least it's easy for me. I'm a doc, so I don't know about the rest of you, but it's super easy for me to grab liquid nitrogen from work.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Yeah, it's a very easy test for hygienic behavior. All right, so down that's one of the things I would kill a queen for, and down the bottom there's basically what I'm looking for. So I'm looking for quiet bees, easy to work bees. I want them to build up quick in spring and make me a ton of brood for making nukes and queens. High honey production, to be honest with you, is not that important to me because this is for fun for me. It's not my job. So, I do select for the ones that make tons of honey, but again, just because it's a hobby and it's fun, not because I need it for any other purpose. Although it's pretty good for making mead, that's for damn sure. All right, I want the bees quiet over winter. I want them in the bottom box. I don't want them using up all their resources. And I want to see those traits passed on one generation to the next. Otherwise, you get one spectacular queen and maybe her kids are duds. You know what I mean? Like being the Tiger Woods of bees and then your kids are no good. Although I think his kids are pretty spectacular at golf too, from what I understand. Bad example, but you get the general gist. Just because mum's awesome doesn't mean the daughters will be. All right, let's move on. So for me, queen selection is an all-year process. Sorry for you guys who saw last talk, another slide's the same. I select bees right the way through. My queen evaluation goes all year long, including during winter. Obviously, you've got the things that we're looking for during the summer months, but during the winter, I'm looking at them too to see who's burning through their resources, who's quietly clustered in the bottom boxes. Frugal overwintering, that's what I want. So that's what I just said there, actually. There's the same information there. So I want to see a tightly balled cluster in the bottom box in late January. I just checked all my nukes yesterday, and I bring nukes through winter in 4/4/4. Well, last year I must have brought this colony through in just 4/4. There's only 8 frames total. They're still in the bottom box with 4 full frames of honey right above them. So they've gone through the entire winter on 4 frames, essentially. They haven't used the top 4 frames yet. So that's a queen that would be really good to keep in my own apiary, not sell, and use her in future as long as she performs well throughout the year. In winter, I want to see them propagate down the top entrance a little. I want to see them clearing out the dead on a warm day. I don't want to see them up in the top box. I want to see them in the bottom box late into winter. So these are photos with an endoscope through the bottom entrance of my colonies in the middle of winter. These are the same photos people saw before. So you're seeing clusters of bees hanging off the bottom frames of the bottom box. This is in January. So these bees are tightly clustered, quiet, not running around, hanging off the bottom frames in the bottom boxes late into winter. Here's the same thing again, dead bee in the front there on the right. Otherwise, you can see the bees hanging off the bottom frames. The endoscope is put in through the lower entrance, and the bees are clustered gently in the bottom boxes. And if you watch Ian Stepler's videos, and I know he's doing single hive management, single hive body management, but nonetheless, it's the same picture you see in his bees, the cluster hanging down below the bottom frames, where they're just gently hanging out, chilling, doing not much of nothing. Same again, dead bees on the bottom, and you can see the clusters hanging off the bottom of the bottom frames in the bottom box late into January. That's what I want. Here's a photo in late January of one of my hives. You can see it's not wrapped. The thermal camera doesn't go through tar paper. So this is an unwrapped colony. You can see the big cluster in the bottom of the bottom box there, which tells me they're doing well. They've got a decent sized cluster and there's food above them. If they were out of food, they'd be up in that top box already. This is an example of a crappy queen who would not be propagated, right? So this is the top box. I looked into the bottom, couldn't see any bees, so I've stuck the endoscope in through the upper entrance. And in the top box, you can see they've emptied all the honey out. This colony is either at risk of starvation or will limp their way through winter with some supplemental feed, and that's not a queen you want to propagate. That's exactly the opposite of what I'm trying to achieve in my apiaries. All right, so queen rearing. You've seen then what I select for: gentle bees with survival, early spring build-up, honey production, consistent food generations. In other words, you don't, generally speaking, I wouldn't choose a 1-year-old queen to breed from because I want to see how she does, over more than one season. I found a yellow dot queen in my apiary this week. That's an 18 queen, 2018 queen. She's 4 years old. So she'll get superseded this year, but she survived her third or fourth winter, which is pretty impressive. That generally doesn't happen. Normally they supersede them before that happens, but for whatever reason, she's still kicking. So I want to see consistency within the daughters, hygienic behavior, and tight brood patterns. That's what I'm looking for. As I said earlier, it's not enough to choose your best queen. No point picking the best queen you've got and then she breeds with some crummy drone from your worst hive or from the neighbour's worst hives. I'm relatively isolated at my yard at home and at my yard at my buddy Bob's place because he's on 350 acres. But, there can always be neighbours' bees that you don't know about. From what I've read, the big boys, Michael Palmer and co, will go and offer their neighbours to allow them to requeen their colonies for free. Hey, listen, I've 8 queens. Here you go. Requeen your colonies. It's good for your colonies. And apparently the neighbours always agree. I've not encountered that myself. I've not had that situation, but it makes sense to me that if you could control the neighbours' bees as well, that would be fantastic. The overall message here is you need to be very deliberate with your drone selection and the location of where you're going to put your mating nuke so that you can have some control over who breeds with your virgins, because raising quality queens is not easy. I mean, anyone can raise crappy queens. You can simply get a weak colony that's on its last legs, take its queen away, chuck it with no resources, and it will raise a little stumpy, shitty queen cell, and you'll get some horrible little dinky queen that might last a few months or a year. Who the heck wants to go to all the effort of making that? If you're going to do this, make quality queens that are consistently better than what you can buy. It's a hobby, right? Give it your best shot. All right. How do you control the drone pool? I kind of talked about this earlier. You kill the drones in any hives that aren't good. That's the simplest first thing to do. And then in order to promote the colonies where you do want drones, at least this is what I do. I shouldn't tell you what you should do. What I do, kill off the drones in the colonies I don't want them to propagate. The ones that I do, I go through and intentionally grow drones. So you put drone comb in there. You can buy these green plastic drone frames from Man Lake and from Date Ant and Better Bee and Blue Sky and whatnot. And they're basically a big drone cell frame, right? You chuck it in, they'll build drone chrome on it. I think the intention of those originally was for varroa control. You could pull them out and freeze the frame and then chuck them back in. The bees would empty it and fill it with more drone. You could freeze it, killing off varroa. I think that was the idea of them originally. But they're great for intentionally raising drones in that second tier of quality queens, right? So your top tier are your donors for eggs. Your second tier, there's a fairly big, larger number of colonies. And these aren't marginal, crappy colonies by any stretch. They're just not your top 2. Your top 2 are going to be your egg donors, at least for me. The next several at each apiary are used for drones and intentionally raising drones. If you don't want to buy drone combs, these plastic drone combs, which aren't terribly expensive, but if you don't want to do that, just get yourself a piece of brood comb and chop a chunk of it out and chuck it back into a production colony. They won't refill it with worker comb. They'll refill it with drone comb. I don't know why they do that, but it's consistent. Take your frame, chop it, half of it out, 2/3 of it out, whatever you want, chuck it back in, and they will fill in any gaps in that with drone combs. If you don't believe me, give it a whirl. It's a really easy way of raising drones. And again, actively remove drone from the colonies you don't want to propagate. That's a good way of controlling Varroa too. I mean, obviously Varroa exists in spaces other than just drone comb, but for whatever reason, they have a predilection for drone comb. So if you can remove it, you're getting rid of some of the Varroa burden. Okay, where are you going to place your mating yards? That's the next question. I'm lucky. I mean, I have two of my good friends have allowed me to have bees at their place. One is my mate Max's place, just down the road. He's about 4 miles, 3.5, 4 miles away. My hives are there, and also Max has an AZ bee house, which is super cool. And we stocked that with some nukes from my stock a year or so ago. So that's good. We have similar, well, exactly the same genetic mix between his hives and mine, which is good. My other yard is over at my friend Bob's place, which is a 300 plus acre organic farm, which is really cool place to raise queens. There's no chemicals out there. About 25 minutes or so from my place. All right, so we're up to the point where you've picked your queen donor. So we know which of our best colonies are going to be where we're going to be taking larvae and eggs from. We've picked our drone donors. We've killed off the drone brood and all the crummy hives, the ones that we don't want contributing to our gene pool. We've picked the perfect spot for our mating yard. What's the next step? Am I going at the right speed or too fast, too slow? What do you reckon? All good? All right. How do I get that down so I can actually see what the heck's underneath there? I've got something on my screen where I can't actually read the bloody page. I think this says, how do we trick the bees into raising queens for us? Let me go so I can see this, because I can't actually see the page. There's something on top of it. Oh, yes, here we go. So how do we induce the bees to raise us some queens? So you've got to work with the bees' natural behavior. So why do queens make bees? Why do bees make queens? There's 3 reasons, right? There's supersedure. So that queen I was telling you about, the yellow dot queen who's old now, her pheromone level will start to drop. Her laying pattern will start to get crummy. Her laying rate will start to decline, and the bees will replace her, right? So they'll raise a new queen while she's still alive, and eventually the new queen will kill off the old one, or she'll swarm away one of the two. More than likely, they'll just kill her off. That's the supersedure response. Not a great way of making queens on a large scale, because you'd have to go around and intentionally injure all your queens to get them to raise a new one. You're only going to get a 1-to-1 replacement doing that, which isn't super suitable if you're trying to raise nukes. So the supersedure response is one reason that bees raise queens, and the next would be the emergency response, right? So we're going to talk about this in detail, but if you make bees queenless, they'll raise queens. The swarming response is when you have an abundance of resource coming in, the queen is running out of areas to lay, they're backfilling the brood nest with nectar, and she's feeling fairly cramped and without space to put the eggs, and so she starts to dwindle down the body size, they start raising queen cells, and away they go. So that's the swarming response, right? Too many bees, too much resource, no space for laying, and they get ready to reproduce. So those are the sort of natural reasons that bees will raise queens, and we're going to manipulate those behaviors, right? All right, so I couldn't think of a better way of writing it than this, so I just stole this out of a bee journal. But this is a brilliant description. I mean, pheromones are involved in every aspect of the life of a honeybee colony. From the beginning of that colony right through to that colony dwindling and dying off, how many years or decades later, pheromones control every part of it. Queen rearing, queen mating, queen to bee behavior, bee to bee behavior. We'll talk about workers, worker to worker, worker to queen, worker to drone, queen to drone. It's all controlled by pheromones. All the castes communicate via pheromones. So it's an absolutely central part of the colony function, and it's a central part of queen rearing for us. All right, so honeybees have this pheromone mix that they make, and the honeybee queen rather, is probably the most important controlling factor in the entire colony. I think we all recognize this too, right? She makes a bunch of pheromones, and that sort of milieu of pheromones that she makes, it's not one. I mean, we know most about the queen mandibular pheromone, right? But there are multiple pheromones that she produces, and it's that milieu that we call the queen signal. And that queen signal is responsible for a ton of things, right? Let's go into that. This is a quick picture of a queen bee showing all the different glands. So we're most familiar with the hypopharyngeal and the mandibular glands in queens, but there are a ton of them. And they all contribute in some way to that milieu, that overall stink, a better word, that the queen makes, right? Her overall stench is a mixture of all these various pheromones from these different glands. And the queen signal, which again is the name we give to that milieu of pheromones, not one, but all of them combined as the queen signal. And it's really responsible, we said, for a lot of the core functions of the hive. I mean, it suppresses the worker bees from laying. It's integral in the castes moving from one spot to the next throughout the hive, from one job to the next. You know, how does the bee know to go from cleaning the hive to cleaning the queen, to bringing in forage, to whatever it might be a receiver bee, whatever it is. All of those jobs are dictated by the queen pheromone or the queen signal. So yeah, it's a pretty important thing. When the queen gets old, as we talked about, or sick or injured, the pheromone either changes or decreases, or if you remove the queen entirely and there's no pheromone whatsoever, the workers will very rapidly raise new queens. That's the emergency response we talked about earlier, right? If there's no ability to raise new queens because you have not left them any young larvae or eggs, then they have two options, right? They dwindle down and die, which would happen if you didn't step in, or you can manipulate that situation by giving them grass and have them raise the queens. But in the absence of any young larvae, pretty soon the inhibition of the worker bees' ovaries is gone, and the worker bees will start to produce eggs. They're infertile eggs, so they're only ever going to be able to make drones. But that's what happens in the absence of a queen. Eventually, you get a drone laying hive, or a laying worker hive, is a better way of describing it. Laying worker hives while we're on it really suck. So one thing I've learned over the years, don't waste time on laying worker hives. If you've got one, I mean, people will waste money buying queens and giving them frames of eggs. None of it works. None of it works. Save your money and effort. Shake the bees out. Give those frames to another colony. The bees will find their ways into other hives. Because those other hives will have laying queens, the pheromone will suppress the laying workers again, or the other bees will kill those laying workers, and then you can go back to splitting those hives back to the original frames a few weeks later and you're good to go. But don't waste your money and resources trying to fix a laying worker hive. It will not work. That's been my experience, and I've dealt with it a few times. All right. So we're talking about queen signal, and as I said, there's lots of glands that make pheromones, right? The one that we know the most about is the queen mandibular gland, and queen mandibular pheromone is probably the best studied of all the pheromones. It's not the only one, but it's probably the best studied one. It's made by these two glands that are just inside the head above the base of the mandible, so back of the jaw there. This is really important. I know this is all minutiae stuff, but this particular slide is really important. These pheromones are not just a smell. It's not like the bees are just wandering around smelling cologne. That's not how this works. The pheromones are produced as a liquid or as a vapor, and they are passed by direct contact. This is going to be really important when it comes to queen rearing, right? Because you don't necessarily need to remove a queen from a hive to make them believe they're queenless. All you have to do is separate them by touch. That could be as simple as two queen excluders. So in other words, two excluders, top one, bottom like this. Now, your queens would have a hard time getting up there touching the other bees. Putting a super between them is sometimes enough to do it, although that's not reliable. But certainly separating physical contact between the workers and the queen will induce them to believe they're queenless, because there's no longer an ability to directly pass that liquid pheromone from bee to bee. This is the behavior we're going to manipulate in queen rearing. Other functions of the queen signal we talked about in terms of driving the functions of the hive and the behavior of the other bees. The retinue response is really interesting, and this is sort of the response that leads to the queen being touched by the other bees. It allows that pheromone to be physically spread around the colony. And I've got a picture here you'll be able to see in a minute. So it turns out a virgin queen has pheromones as well, but her pheromone mix is not the same as a mated queen's pheromone mix. And as a result, she's less able to control the hive. And I think we've also all seen that in your colonies, where a little virgin's running around scared and scatterbrained, and the other bees really aren't paying her much mind. So the retinue response is where the smell attracts the other bees to come in contact with the queen, hence picking up and being able to physically spread that pheromone throughout the colony. So here's a photo of this. On the left there, you've got a virgin queen, and you can see the bees aren't really paying her much mind. I guess there's a couple of them blowing together. For the most part, they're just doing their own thing, right? That's a virgin queen on the left. And on the right, you see the retinue response, where her pheromone is immediately attracting worker bees to turn toward her, come into physical contact with her, and physically spread that pheromone around. All right. For me personally, that's the reason I use cells rather than virgins and mating nukes. I know lots of queen rearers use virgins very effectively. I haven't had much luck with it. I tend to just put cells in. I make charged queen cells, put them in like at a higher acceptance rate that I have introducing virgins. And that may be a technique thing on my part, I'm not sure, but I have more success with cells than virgins. Lots of queen rearers use virgins exclusively. All right, so as I said at the beginning of the talk, queen rearing relies on our ability to manipulate normal bee behaviors, which is emergency response and the swarming response primarily. We're not really worried about the supersedure response. And the pheromonal communications between the bees, hence stimulating those two responses, right? So how do we go about doing it? There's tons of techniques for queen rearing, tons and tons of them. Your two broad categories are grafting or not grafting. Those are the two broad choices you have. Obviously, non-grafting is easier, right? You don't have to buy the equipment. You don't have to have super good eyesight or hand-eye coordination, although I wouldn't say I have either of those things. But there is a certain technique and skill to it, and there's a bit of practice involved, and there is some equipment you need, yada, yada. So not grafting is probably simpler, but I don't think it's quite as effective at generating the number of queen cells that I would want to generate. I mean, it depends on your goals, right? Let's say you've got 5 to 10 hives and you want to make new queens, then yeah, I think a non-grafting technique is perfectly adequate because you'll get plenty of cells to do that. If you're trying to raise 200 or 300 queens, then it's probably not the most effective way of pulling it off. So there's a bunch of ways of doing it. The simplest way would be to make a queenless split and wait. Just make your bees queenless. Make sure they've got some young eggs, framed with eggs and young larvae, and they'll raise a queen for you. That's using the emergency response, right? That's an emergency queenless response. You do get okay queens that way, provided there's plenty of nutrition. It's not my preferred way to do it, and I'll explain as we go through why I do it the way I do it. You could just buy virgins, I suppose. You can buy virgins or cells. Not really queen rearing per se, but it can be done. The MP 10/10 and 5-frame starter I'm going to leave because I'm going to talk about those in detail. Those are the two techniques that I use. And there's cell starters finishes or combination starter finishes, which we'll talk about also as we go through. But broadly speaking, grafting or non-grafting are your two choices. So let's talk about some non-grafting ways of getting this done. Crazy thing is I've got grafting right in the middle of the slide. Okay, I'm not the best presenter in the world, but non-grafting ways. Does anyone know what a Snellgrove board is? Snellgrove board is a double screen board. It's just, think about a shim of wood with two pieces of wire mesh in it. What does that do? It prevents the bees from physically touching the queen, which means that you can't spread around mandibular pheromone, which means you've lost that communication, which means the bees will believe that they are queenless, despite there being a queen an inch below them. Remember I was telling you, it's really critical to understand, I think, how the bees communicate, because that's what we're manipulating when we're making queens. So you could use an excluder with a super in between, same thing, physical separation. Doesn't always work, mostly works. Cell punching is an interesting technique. I'm going to show you some pictures of that. Essentially, you get a foundationless frame, chuck it in your hive, wait for your queen to lay in it, and then you take it out and you look at the frame, you find where the young larvae are, and you take a little circular piece of steel and punch a hole in the frame. So you've taken that little piece out that has the cell on it, put a wax on the back of it, stick it on a grafting frame, and essentially it's like you grafted a young larvae. It's a lot of work. I mean, to raise hundreds that way would take a ton of work. Because you think about when you're picking up a frame of larvae, you've got to look through and find the appropriate size larvae, right? The Nico system is a really cool non-grafting technique. I'm going to show you pictures of all these things. Essentially, it's a little special frame with push-in cells. You chuck that in the middle of a regular frame, put it in the hive for a couple of weeks, and they'll build wax all the way around it. And then once it's all built out, you lock your queen inside the Nico cage, and she'll lay in those little cups. And about 3 days later, you've got the appropriate size larvae. You simply pull the little cups out, let your queen go, take the little cups out, stick them on a grafting frame, and again, it's as if you grafted a 3.5-day-old larvae, but the queen actually laid them for you. I've had some success with it. I wouldn't say I've had screaming success with it, because sometimes the queen just bloody refuses to lay in there. She'll wander around there for days and lay nothing, or she'll lay 1 or 2 eggs, or she'll lay 5, you know, and none of that's useful. But I have had one time where I got a ton of queens off of it, so I just use it for an experiment. I think it's a reasonable alternative if you don't feel comfortable grafting. And then I don't know what I've got this on the slide, castles and mating nukes are for later in the talk, but again, they're nothing to do with actually raising queens apart from after you've got cells. And artificial insemination is something I'm going to get into, I think. I haven't done it yet. Margie and I are getting some more kids this year. We're adopting some kids, and it's kind of hectic at our place, so I haven't really started that process. But I think I will with time, because that gives you complete control over the genetic mix in your queens. You know, you're going to harvest and kill drones, steal their sperm, artificially inseminate the queen of your choice, and then you have complete control over how and by whom she's mated, which is very appealing if you're doing queen rearing, because that's the part of it I don't like. You don't have 100% control over that no matter what you do. All right, so here's the Nico system. So you can see this kind of little plastic frame that's got a clear, solid plastic backing on one side, and if you flip it over, this is the picture on the right. If you flip it over, you can see it's got kind of a queen excluder. And those holes you can see there lead to the little brown cup on that. So you put your queen in, the little white plug in the end, you stick the queen in, you put the plug in. She'll wander around laying in those little brown cups, hopefully. And then 3.5 days later, you pull those cups out, put them on a grafting frame, and box your. So here's a picture of that. You can see the little plastic gizmo is in a frame with all the comb built up around it. It's a little time consuming because you've got to nail it into the frame and then stick it in the hive and wait for them to build the comb, which, you know, takes a week or two. And then once they've laid, you pull out the little cups and you stick them in your grafting frame, which you can see at the bottom of picture 2 there. And then you can stick it into a starter and raise queens that way. This is a Snellgrove board. So what you're seeing in the bottom of that Snellgrove board is the frame. So they've got it in this particular picture sitting on top of a box with frames in it. Imagine those frames are not in there. It's basically a board that's about that thick. It's got 2 pieces of very thin mesh the bees can't get through. And it's got all these little doors. There's 3 of them there. And effectively, there's a door at the top and at the bottom. And you can manipulate the patterns of these doors to basically have all the foraging bees leave the bottom of the hive and come back into the top of the hive, making the top portion of your hive. So you'd have a super on top of the Snellgrove board, right? Let me see if I can explain this clearly. So you've got a hive that's got queen cells in the bottom, right? You've got a double deep, there's queen cells in the bottom. You're going to move all of the cat brood into the top box above your Snellgrove board and leave your queen down the bottom with just 1 frame of brood that she's on and a bunch of empty foundational comb. So what have you done? You've effectively made a swarm, right? As far as the queen's concerned, all of the resources are gone, all of the young bees are gone because they're up top of the brood. She can't get to them. They believe they're queenless because they can't touch her. And then you're using these little doors, the combination to funnel the bees from the bottom. And it's kind of a long talk. There's instructions with the Snellgrove board. I've got a few of them, they work. And you're basically funneling the bees from the bottom of the box. Any foragers that might be up, might be flying around. When they come back, they can't get into the bottom box because you've closed off the bottom entrance. The only way to get into the hive is through one of these Snellgrove doors. And you change the pattern every few days, and eventually all of the foraging bees see the top boxes where they live. And so they come and go happily in the top box. You've got a syrup feeder on that. You've got your queen cells up there. You've got all your cat brood. And if you wanted to make even more queen cells than that, you would simply take down the queen cells that were originally in the bottom box, give that top box a frame of eggs, and they will raise an absolute mountain of queen cells for you, 10, 15, 20 queen cells. The trouble with that technique, and the trouble with any non-grafted technique really, is you've got to have some way of getting the cells off the frames. So I think if you were going to do this, ideally you would use foundationless frames. You could do it with foundation frames. You just have to find some sneaky way of cutting it off the plastic without actually damaging the queen cell. I did say last talk, I saw this dude on YouTube who'd made sort of like a little sock thing, like you put on a broken finger out of hardware cloth, and he'd made this little thing, just bent into shape. He'd slid it over the queen cells and stuck it into the comb on a frame that had a real foundation on it. And he waited for the virgins to hatch out into that little cup thing that he made, a little sock thing. And when they were in there, he'd twist the end of it off and go and put that into a nucleus colony. I think that's a reasonable way to do it. I can't think of any other safer way of getting them off the foundation. This is a cloak board made by a New Zealand fella, so clearly it's genius. The cloak board is essentially exactly the same thing. Instead of this time you having two mesh barriers or physically separating the queen by moving the box that she's in this case, you've got a slide and an out piece of steel here. You can see if you took the steel out, it's just a queen excluder, right? Queen excluder is not enough to make your bees believe they're queenless because they can still communicate with the queen by touch. You can stick the face up, they can stick their face down, Bob's your uncle. But if you stick a piece of steel there, you've separated them entirely. It's the same idea as a snell growth board, except now you're using a solid barrier instead of two mesh barriers. I don't believe that this would stop smell, but it certainly stops touch. So exactly the same principle. So you'd put your bottom box with your queen and very little resource down the bottom. You put your top box with all the cat brood, chuck in a frame of eggs, cut them off from the queen by sliding that piece of steel in. The queen down the bottom believes that she's already swarmed because all of a sudden all of the bees are gone, all the food's gone. There's no longer this abundance of resources, abundance of bees. She's comfortable enough. The bees up top believe they're queenless because they cannot touch the queen, hence they cannot get any mandibular pheromone. And then they'll raise queen cells. Incidentally, that's why bee escapes work. You know, like if you put in a skateboard below your supers, which is how I get the bees out of my honey supers, right? You've got full supers, you chuck in a skateboard under it, you come back 3 days later, there's no bees in your top boxes. The reason that works is there is a pre-programmed, I love bees, they're so cool, they're so predictable in their sort of robotic behaviors. They've got this sort of 72-hour cycle where they go, you know, we're talking about the receiving and the storing bees. They've got this sort of cycle where they rotate out of the supers down to the brood nest and back up into the supers again. And it's on about a 72-hour rotation. And it happens all the way through spring and summer. Well, that's what you're manipulating when you chuck an skateboard in, because you know that over the next 72 hours, every one of those bees is going to have to leave the supers to go down and touch the queen to get their fix of mandibular pheromone, their bee speed or whatever you call it, their bee crack. They've got to go down there to get a taste of the queen. Otherwise, you know, no good happens. So that rotation is what you're manipulating when you're chucking a skateboard in. It's exactly the same idea as making the queenless here. All right, here's cell punching. So this little, I don't do this, but it's a fairly clever little idea. You've got a foundationless frame. Your queen is laid in it. You go through and you look and see which one has the larvae size that you want. And I'm going to show you all of that. Don't worry, I'll show you exactly what size larvae you want to select. And this little gadget is made basically out of a copper washer and a little piece of copper steel or copper stick, what they got from Home Depot by the looks of it. And it's just bonded to itself. Stick down there, make a little punch, and then you take that little disc that you've taken off the frame, you put a blob of wax on the bottom of it and stick it onto your foundation, onto your grafting frame that you're then going to put into your cell start. All right, so we talked about this, the cloak board. The Demery method's actually a swarm control technique, but they will raise queens in the top box if you do this. It's essentially the same idea. It's physical separation within the same stack. In this case, you're simply separating them with multiple supers. That's more or less the Demery method. It's a swarm control technique, but it actually works for making queens in the top box also. In the Demery method, you would cut out those queens and then recombine them by removing the supers. But if you try to use it for raising queens, you obviously don't cut out the queen cells. The fat bee man, who I guess has lost a ton of weight. He doesn't want to be the fat bee man anymore. Don Kleinmeister, whatever his name is. He's pretty cool as well on YouTube. So what he does, he gets his foundationless frames and he literally takes a knife and cuts out a thin strip of the comb that has the larvae he wants, rotates it 90 degrees, puts some wax on it and sticks it on a grafting frame. Same idea. You're basically getting the right age larvae stuck to a grafting frame to stick into a starting colony, but you didn't have to graft it. The Miller method, I think, is not super useful. We all know they build swarm cells off the bottom of the combs, right? Generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, your supersedure cells are higher up the frame and your swarm cells hang off the bottom. I think most of us have seen that. The Miller method is, again, it's foundationless frame. You get your frame like this and you cut the comb like this. So you're cutting a jagged sawtooth pattern into the comb. You take all the bottom stuff out. So now all you're left with is the top of your frame, and at the top here, you've got this sort of pattern of comb. And this obviously has to have eggs and larvae in it before you do this. I should have mentioned that. And then you go through and you pinch various points. So you're making little blobs of dead comb and little blobs where there are still eggs and cells. And the Miller method is hoping that the bees will recognize those little cells that are individually not pinched and raise queens of them. didn't work for me, to be perfectly honest with you. I tried doing it. I didn't think it was that useful. This is really early on before I started grafting. You know, I thought I'd tell you about it because people use it. I didn't find it very useful. All right, so let's get on to the crux of this. All techniques that you're going to use, doesn't matter how you're getting the larvae to your starter, doesn't matter if you're grafting or non-grafting. In all of these techniques, you have to have young bees to feed the larvae, otherwise this is not going to work. So remember, genetically, your queen bee and your worker bee are identical genetically, right? They're exactly the same. They laid as the same female egg. So how do they become so different? How do they get so morphologically and longevity? Why is there such a drastic difference in longevity? The behavior differences, their morphological differences, physiological differences, when they're genetically identical? It turns out the only difference is the nutrition in the larval stage. So here's the breakdown. A worker larvae in the first 5 days of its life is fed about 140 times. And the worker jelly that they're fed is basically a sugary, low-protein syrup. The queen larvae, on the other hand, over the first 4 days of its life is getting about 1,600 feedings. So a ton more feed and a much more complicated feeding regime. So they're getting a protein, sugar, amino acid, fatty acid, vitamin mix in a very specific ratio, a much more high quality food, I guess, than the worker larvae is getting. And that's what accounts for the difference, is that input of better nutrition makes this egg morph into a queen as opposed to morphing into a worker. So I know this is all pretty dry and boring and people are like, God, this sucks. Can't we just talk about making queens? I think it's really important because remember I said earlier, anyone can make stumpy, crappy queen cells. What separates good queens from crappy queens is the prep work that leads up to them. So making a queen cell is easy. Making a quality queen cell is not. Anyone's able to make little crappy midget queen cells, but they're going to be crappy queens. If you're going to do that, if you don't want to put the effort into preparing your donor hives and your starter colonies properly, you may as well just literally make queenless splits, make them as strong as you can, and let them raise their own queen, because they'll do a better job than you will do if you're doing a half-assed job of getting things ready. Because they just won't, you won't get quality nutrition, and hence you won't get quality queen. All right. So how do the nurse bees manage to feed this stuff to the queens? Well, this is really important. It's the young nurse bees that feed the larvae. It's not old nurse bees. By the time nurse bees get to about 12 to 14 days of age, they're really done with being nurse bees and they become wax-producing bees. And they move through the various sort of roles of the worker bee on a time schedule. They don't have a very long lifespan, right? So they've got to crack on and get from one job to the next. So they're really only feeding from about day 5 to about day 12 to 14, perhaps. And after that, they're just wax-producing bees. They're not much good for your queens. You'll see here that it says I prefer the technique. I'm coming back to this. This is a really important reason that I think this is better than any other queen rearing method that I've used. The stuff that these worker bees are producing, their hypopharyngeal glands and their mandibular glands, producing a certain mix of sugar and protein and fat. And they make it at different stages. But you remember your queen bee needs both, right? And she needs it in huge amounts, 1,600 feedings over just a few days. So you need to have a ton of young nurse bees, to adequately feed her. All right, so we're at this point now. We've chosen our queen mother, we've chosen our drone donor hives, we've picked the perfect spot for our mating. We have a good understanding that we need a lot of young nurse bees, somewhere between 5 and 12 days old. And we've made a decision on what kind of queen rearing technique we're going to use. What do we do next? Think about what we're going to do with the cells, because that time goes really quick. Whatever technique you use, if you're successful, you've got 5 days till those cells are capped. You've got 10 days until you need to put them in nukes. It goes so quick you wouldn't believe it. And then all of a sudden, let's say I'm grafting on the 1st. What day is the 1st? It's Sunday, I think, isn't it? Sunday or Monday. So I'll be grafting 90 queen cells. If I don't have nukes them to go and 10 days later, I wasted my time, right? So you've got to think about that in advance. What are you going to do with these cells? And there's a bunch of options here. You can use nukes, mating nukes, queen castles. You could just requeen your bigger hives, right? Cull off the old queen, chuck the cell in there a couple of days later, or a day later. You could sell the cells. You could sell virgins. selling the mated queens. Have a plan about what you're going to do with these cells or the virgins that come from the cells before you get started, because that time goes really rapidly. So here's a few different examples of ways to get your cells hatched and mated. These are various sorts of nukes that I've used. The top left-hand corner is a double mating nuke. It's styrofoam. There's these little special tiny little frames. The central portion is a feeder on each end. The queens can't get to each other because there's a little tiny grey queen excluder between each section. You actually need no brood in these. You can put about a cup of bees into this. And keep in mind, by the time you put your queen cell in there, it's completely finished being fed. It's capped. It no longer needs nutrition, so you can just scoop some bees off a brood frame. Make sure you don't have a queen in there. That would be a disaster. Scoop some worker bees, a cup full or so, dump them in there, chuck the lid on, put some syrup in, you're good to go. I don't use a lot of these because they're quite pricey, these little styrofoam things. For what they are, they're quite pricey. And the other thing that I don't like is you really can't take the frames out and chuck them into a bigger box. I like everything to be relatively uniform. So I raise queens on deep frames. So you can see in the picture below that, you've got a 2-frame deep mating nuke. The one below that's interesting. I've never used that one before, where you've got both full-length deep frames and the half-length deep frames. I've not used that. It's a cool-looking gadget. The one to the right of that is a 4-way queen castle. Above that's a standard 5-frame nuke box, and above that is the 3-chamber queen castle. Queen castles are basically 3 separate cavities within a 10-frame box, each one separated by this little slide-in board. They've each got their own entrance. They each have their own upper lid, and the queens can only get back into one section, hopefully. Once they're back in there, they can't go from one section to the other because the divider stops them. They're not the greatest thing ever, but they're a good place to... So I have 5 or 6 4-way castles like the one on the bottom there. And I sort of use them as an emergency. If I get more queen cells than I was expecting, or, you know, for whatever reason I graft and I have tons of queen cells, I'll chuck them in there just so they can hatch and get mated. But I think you get a better success rate in slightly larger colonies. So I like 2-frame, 3-frame, and 5-frame nucleus colonies as mating nukes. That's what I personally like. But again, people use all of these techniques, and shit, the way I do it's not necessarily the way you should do. I'm just sort of telling you how I get it done. All right, so we're grafting now. Because this is how I raise queens. I graft them. So have a look down the bottom. This is not my picture. I stole it. If you have a look down the bottom at item C, that's an egg laying on its side, right? So keep in mind, day 1, your egg's upright. By the time day 3 gets there, the egg is laying flat. Day 3.5, it hatches and becomes this slightly curled, comma-shaped larvae. You want the tiniest larvae you can possibly get. Keep in mind the physiology here. She's only getting fed for 4 days. So you don't want to take a day 5 larvae because you've already missed one of the critical days that larvae could have been fed royal jelly, tons of royal jelly. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, 1,600 feeds over 4 days is 400 feedings a day. If you get a day too old with your larvae, you've robbed that queen of 25% of its potential nutrition, and I think you've decreased the quality of the queen you're going to get as a result. So you want the youngest larvae you can possibly get. And I see that they have labeled A as the larvae that they would have chosen in this. A is a fine larvae, nothing wrong with it. It's a tad older than I would be trying to get. If you go to the far left, go 2 cells left of A, you see that tiny little comma-shaped larvae in the bottom of that pool of royal jelly? That's the larvae I would choose. So you want to get a larvae that has a good puddle of royal jelly because it's just easy to graft. It's easy to pick up. And you want the tiniest larvae you can get. The larvae we're looking for here are smaller than the egg, quite dramatically smaller than the egg. Compare C with A. And A is too big in my opinion. Now compare C with the one that I was going to choose, which is 2 to the left of A. You see the egg's a lot bigger, right? I think, yeah, that's all right. I won't show you the rest of them. So that's the idea there. You pick the smallest larvae you want. You want the one that's got the slightest comma shape to it. If it starts to get like this, you've got a larvae that's a little too old. Certainly if the larvae is getting a white color, it's miles too old. It's not to say they won't raise a queen, but the queen will be crap. Okay? This is a grafting perch. I got this from Kim and Ben at Hungry Bear Farms. It's just it's a cool little gadget, actually. I mean, prior to this, I'd have the thing sitting on my desk with books propped up under it to try and get the right angle. And you've got your headlamp and you're trying to look down into the cells. This thing's cool because it's an adjustable perch. So you just undo the little, wing nut things and you adjust it to whatever angle suits you. I use a headlamp magnifier because I'm 49 now and I wear bloody cheetah glasses because I'm getting old and blind. And so looking down at something that's small in a grain of sand, it's really difficult. So maybe not small in a grain of sand. It's tiny anyway. It's difficult with my own eyes. So with my cheetah glasses and with a magnifying headlamp, I can see what I'm doing. This is the grafting frame. So it's basically a standard frame with some extra little wood notches on it, and you get these little plastic grafting frames off Amazon. They're dirt cheap. You get 4 of them for like $15 or something like that. The cups are also pretty cheap. You get a couple of hundred of them for about $20, something like that. And you can pick whatever color you like. I actually find the black ones a little bit easier to see into the bottom of than the yellow ones. Yellow ones seem logical, right, because they're honeybees, but it actually turns out it's a little more difficult, at least for me, to see the bottom of the cell cup in the yellow ones than there's the black ones. This is a Chinese grafting tool. At the top right-hand corner, it's got a little red button with a spring you can push down. That slides this little white plastic tongue at the other end down. And at the very bottom, there is a little tiny thin bamboo filament. It's very flexible. It bends. So basically, you put it in and it curves under the larvae. And then as you pull it back up, the larvae's stuck on this bamboo filament, right? You push the button and the other piece slides down and pushes the larvae off the bamboo and into your cell cup. It sounds difficult. It's not. It takes a little practice. The most important thing is not to strip. I'll go into that in a second. This is a German grafting tool. I haven't had a whole bunch of success with this. Picking them up is a piece of cake because it's got the right angle on it, right? It's already got that little angle on it. So picking up the larvae is super easy, but getting the bloody things off the grafting tool and into your cell cup, I find that a bit problematic. So I end up using a toothpick or I use a Chinese grafting tool to push it off. And I think, well, what the hell's the point of that? I might just use the grafting tool in the first place. But again, it's not how I do it, right? Everybody has their own preferences. Some people graft with a toothpick. Some people graft with a piece of grass. I mean, it's whatever suits your style. Some use a very small paintbrush. Whatever you can pick up the larvae safely and transfer it, there is no right or wrong. Alrighty, so here's the basic process of it. I like the size of the larvae they've got identified here. It's teeny tiny. That's what you're looking for. It's got the slightest bend to it, significantly smaller than an egg. And you put your little grafting tool down there. He's got a black one in this particular case, but you can see the white plastic plunger above it in picture B. Picture C is a very close-up picture of the filament, the bamboo filament. Sometimes I'll get this and get a bit of sandpaper and rub the filament on sandpaper and make it even thinner because you want it extremely flexible. You don't want any stiffness to this. If you lick a little bit, that will also get a kind of a kink to it to start with. All little technique things you will find yourself as you're doing it. And then the picture on the right there, D, is what you're looking for at the end of all this. You're looking for your larvae to be sitting in its pool of royal jelly, untouched by your hands or by the tool. What do I mean by that? Well, if you've got your puddle with the larvae sitting on top, you're looking to scoop under the puddle and pick the entire thing up en masse with your larvae sitting on a nice puddle of royal jelly. So you're not actually touching the larvae with your tool. And then when you push it off, again, you're pushing the puddle of royal jelly off into the cup with the larvae on top of it. If you touch the larvae, it's more than likely to flip over. And the larvae only have breathing apparatus on one side. So if you flip it, the larvae drowns. So that's toast, you know. It sounds super complicated, and it definitely takes some practice. I mean, the more you do it, the better your acceptance rates go. But that's the same for any skill, right? I mean, you practice it, you get better at it. No one taught me how to do it. My reps get pretty good after I do it. A few rounds, it gets better and better and better. It's just, you know, and at the beginning it sucked, and that's just what you've got to expect with any new skill, right? All right, to prime or not to prime. So priming means putting some other liquid in the bottom of your plastic cell cup to make it a little bit easier to transfer your larvae off. So sometimes when you've got your larvae on your Chinese grafting tool or German, whatever you're using, you've got your puddle of royal jelly, you've got your larvae sitting on top of it. You go to put that into the cell cup and you push it. It doesn't want to come off because you're trying to push it into a dry cup. So the idea of priming, is to put something in the bottom of that plastic cell cup to make it easy to glide the larvae off. I've tried it with water. I've tried it with royal jelly. I haven't found a whole bunch of difference, to be honest. And again, it may be my technique. Maybe that's why it's not much different for me. But I did find a study looking at this specific question. They were comparing the acceptance rates using various techniques by the same grafter, by the same beekeeper, for Italian and Carniolan bees. And they found, interestingly, that Carniolan bees, the acceptance rate was far lower than Italian honeybees, for whatever reason. And they also had tried various priming liquids. They tried honey, they tried water, they tried distilled water, they tried royal jelly. And they found a significant improvement when they primed the cells with royal jelly. And I've tried that, and I haven't found a huge improvement. It definitely makes it easy to get the larvae off. There's no question about that. I wouldn't say it made a gigantic difference to my acceptance rates. My acceptance rates are normally 80 to 90% or thereabouts. Sometimes better than that. Sometimes I get 100%. Sometimes I get 75%. When I'm planning my year out, I try and be realistic, right? And I think we're all guilty of always wanting to pick the best case scenario. And that's in all aspects of life. Like, wow, what if I get this job and I get this much money? Or what if I get this girl or whatever it is? But you got to be realistic. I mean, I bank on 75% acceptance rate and then 75% of those cells becoming mated queens. And you oftentimes do much better than that. But if you bank on those numbers, you're probably going to be ballpark where you need to be with how many nuke boxes you need to make up. And like I said earlier, sometimes I end up with an extra 20 cells because things went much better than I was expecting. And then I use the queen castles, which are little 2-frame sections of a 10-frame box. All right, sorry to go on. This is what I was saying earlier. When you're grafting, you don't want to scoop the larvae out. The tendency is to want to do this when you stick the tool in, get under it and scoop the thing out. But what tends to happen when you do that is you dig the tool into the bottom of the cell. And then as you pull it out, the piece of wax flips the larvae over and it's now dead. And one of the real pain in the butt things about grafting bees is looking for the right age larvae. So you don't have an infinite amount of time to do that, right? Once the frame is out of the hive, you've got plenty of time, but you don't have all day. Once it's out of the hive, those tiny little larvae with a tiny little puddle of royal jelly will start to dry out. Once they desiccate, game's over. So if you find one finally and you flip the bloody thing over, it's quite irritating. You've then got to look around and try and find another one the right age again. So when you're doing the technique with your Chinese grafting tool, I'll use this pencil. What you want to do is this. That's what we all feel like we should do. Scoop the thing up. That's not the right thing to do. You go vertically straight down the wall of the cell, and the little flimsy bamboo filament on the end will bend itself under the larvae without you changing the angle of this. You simply push vertically down, right up against the edge of the cell, push down, the little filament will bend under the larvae, and then you pull vertically straight back up again, and surface tension will pull the liquid and the larvae up with the little filament. It took me a long while to figure that out. I kept scooping and digging holes in the frame. It's bloody irritating. Once you learn not to scoop, you do much better with your grafting. All right. Here's a few tips to help acceptance rates and help you enjoy this a little bit more. Be realistic in your expectations. Your success rates gets better each time you do it. This is a fine motor skill. It's a new skill, and the more you do it, the better you get. Simple as that. It's not different to playing an instrument, or I'm trying to learn Spanish at the moment. I'm bloody horrible at it, but the more I do it, the better I get at it, even though I was completely awful at the beginning. It's the same idea here, right? You start something new, you work at it, you get better at it. Take your time with this. The trouble is when you watch YouTube, you're watching extremely experienced cell grafters, and they're doing a larvae about every 10 to 15 seconds. That's not feasible if you're just getting started. It might take you a minute or two to find the right size larvae, and it may take you another minute to get that into the cup. That's okay. Do the best you can. There's no prizes here for rushing through it. Keep in mind, this is a hobby. We're doing it for fun. If you're worried your grafting success rate's going to be crappy, set up 2 or 3 starters. Get a whole bunch of these going at once, and then maybe you get more cells than you need, but that's a good problem to have. All right, so keep your environment warm and humid. Try and reproduce what's inside the beehive, right? The bees live in a humid, hot environment. So keep in mind that your larvae are sitting in a tiny little puddle, maybe a cc of liquid. And if it dries out because you're in a hot, dry room or you're in an air-conditioned room, you have much less time to graft. So you want to get yourself a nice, humid room, maybe have the kettle boiling in the corner, do it in a small room, get a nice, big, wet tea towel, hot, wet tea towel, and lay it over your frame, pick it up, find the larvae you want, lay it back down again, and that humidity and moisture and heat will go a long way to stopping the larvae desiccating. The same is true for your grafting frame. So I'll put the camera down like this for a second so you can see my screen. So I would have my grafting frame sitting here. My grafting bar with my cells on it, right, that I'm going to put the larvae into, would be sitting here on my table. My grafting frame is in front of me. I pick the larvae up, I put it in here, and I cover this back up again with a wet, warm tea towel, because you don't want your cells, your larvae, you just put into your little plastic cells to desiccate either. So keep the frame covered in a nice, hot, wet tea towel. Do the same thing with your grafting bar. And as soon as you're done, I leave the frame where it's at. I'm like, well, whatever, let's leave that frame there in the office or at my grafting table, wherever I happen to be working, in my car, whatever. And then I take my grafting frame with all my bars straight out the cell builder, no monkeying around. It continues to be wrapped in a hot, wet tea towel as I go out there, and I stick it straight into a starting frame, into a starting hive, rather. Like I said earlier, don't flip your larvae over. If you don't scoop, you probably won't flip them. Here we go, warm paper towels, warm tea towels. So I just said, God, I should look at this before I start speaking, because I just said exactly what's on this frame. Experiment with the different tools. They all have a different feel in your hand. They're all bloody cheap. You can get 10 of those Chinese grafting tools for $10 off Amazon, free delivery. They're dirt cheap. Of course, they're also junk. They don't last very long, so that's why you need a box of 10 of them. And, you know, out of the 10, 3 or 4 of them won't work right out of the bag. So get a few of them. I have tons of them lying around at all times. They're dirt cheap, and I go through a whole bunch of them every year. Like I said, I shave the little filament down a little bit more on some sandpaper to make it really flexible. Use a good light, good magnifier, unless you've got spectacular eyes. I can't do it without a magnifier glass. My eyes just aren't good enough. Get the smallest larva you can, and make sure she's got a good puddle of royal jelly under her. And you can manipulate that by feeding your donor, feeding your queen donor hive. So remember our top queen that we're going to pick our larva from, you feed her for 10 to 14 days before you take the larvae, so that those nurse bees are completely packed with nutrition themselves and able to make the most, you know, hyperpharyngeal mandibular secretions that they can. All right, so this, I think, is super, super critical when it comes to success. Remember I said that anyone can make crappy queens, right? Anybody can raise crappy little stumpy garbage cells. Making cells so large that they won't fit in a cell protector, that's your goal. Making a cell so big that when you hold the cell up at the end, the plastic cup at the top is completely white with royal jelly that the queen hasn't been able to eat. There's so much in there that she wasn't able to consume it all. That's what you're looking for, and they make huge queens. There's a reason for it. I'm going to show you some evidence for that in a sec. I think personally, the better you prep, the more success you have. So the starter setup, I think, has at least to do with your success as your grafting technique does. Certainly in my case, a really strong, I don't mean like a fairly strong colony. I mean one that's unnaturally, freakishly pouring out the sides of the boxes big and hopelessly queenless. That colony will fix a lot of your grafting mistakes because they have no choice, right? They're dying. They are grossly overpopulated. They have way too much food and they're hopelessly queenless. And when you give them a frame of larvae, even if some of them are sort of stuck up the wall of the cell and not perfectly in there and there's not much royal jelly, those nurse bees will help those larvae out a long way better than perfect grafting technique, in my opinion. All right, so huge, strong starter, very forgiving. Prepare your queen donor hive and the drone donor hive and the starter with very careful setup, feeding, and swarm prevention. So I'm going to talk you through what I've been doing this week. So grafting for me is on May 1st. So on April 20th is when I started doing my cell starter and feeding my donor hive. Drone building has actually been going on for a couple of weeks already. So getting the drone frames in and whatnot, killing off drones. But just talking about my queen donor hives. They're getting 2-to-1 syrup, they're getting pollen patties, and they have been since the 20th. But when you give, obviously I picked my strongest queens, right? The best queens that came through winter. So they're pretty strong already, and you're going to give them a ton of syrup and a ton of pollen for 2 weeks. And it's swarm season, right? What triggers the swarming response? Abundance of bees, too much resources, not enough room for your queen to lay, and they make swarm preparation. So when you're feeding your best queen, you've got to be bloody sure you don't lose her in a swarm, right? So you've got to check that colony every 3 or 4 days, cull off queen cells, give her a couple of empty combs, take some brood out. You've got to be proactive in managing that queen. Your goal with that queen is to give you beautiful 3.5-day-old larvae. Your goal is not for that queen to be packed to the point where she's going to swarm, right? That's not that colony's job. That colony's job is to give you beautiful larvae. feed the heck out of it. Make sure you're doing swarm control aggressively, otherwise she will swarm and you'll lose your best queen. The starter colony. What's a starter colony? Well, the starter colony is the colony you're going to put your grafts into. I do the Michael Palmer 10/10 combined starter finisher technique. I'm going to go through that in painful detail here in a second. But essentially, your starter colony is going to be a colony that is grotesquely overfilled with young nurse bees. I mean, unnaturally, disgustingly overfilled. I'll give you an example. One of the techniques I've used to raise queens, if I don't have enough resource for 10 full packed capped frames of brood, which is what it takes to do the 10/10 Michael Palmer technique, is I'll take a 5-frame starter, which is basically 2 5-frame root boxes I nailed together, top and bottom. I'll put 4 frames of food in there and 1 frame of capped brood, and then I will shake 10 to 15 frames of nurse bees in there. So you've got a 5-frame space with 10 to 15 frames worth of bees. I mean, they're all over each other. I mean, it's literally this deep, solid bees at the bottom. When you put the frames in, they slide down slowly on the way to the bees. It's crazy populated. That's the kind of starter you want. You want a starter that is disgustingly overloaded with young nurse bees. The trouble with that little 5/5 starter is you can't control the age of those nurse bees, right? Remember, we want bees that are between 5 and 12 days old. So make sure you're setting up your starter nicely. The starter has also been fed for me since the 20th of April. And again, it's swarm control, man. So when I'm setting up the starter, I've got a pretty strong colony with my queen at the bottom. I've taken all of the cat brood, moved it above a queen excluder into a 10-frame box above. And then I have made every other frame space in that top box cat brood. So you have literally got 10 frames of solid wall-to-wall brood in that top box. So, and then you feed it. You feed it syrup and pollen patty. So what would happen if you took a super strong colony and then gave it another 10 frames of cat brood? They'll swarm, right? So you've got to continuously check that cell starter to make sure they don't swarm. Because what's the point of that cell starter if the bloody thing swarms? You've lost all the bees you're trying to use. All right, let's move forward. So you're looking for a ridiculously popular starter, a vast majority of those bees being between birth and 10 to 12 days old, keeping in mind after that they become wax builders and not very useful to you. They need to have a continuous flow of syrup because that is what triggers the swarming response, right? Bees swarm when there's an abundance of nectar coming in, they're backfilling the brood nest, the queen hasn't got anywhere to lay. And you need to do that right up until your queen cells are capped, which is day 5, after the graft. Your queen donor is also going to be fed syrup and pollen for a couple of weeks prior to the graft, so their larvae are going to be floating in big pools of royal jelly, and that makes grafting easier. Dry grafting is super difficult. If the larvae is sitting in the bottom of a cell with almost no royal jelly, it's super difficult to pick her up. If there's a nice big pool of royal jelly, it's actually quite simple. As long as you don't scoop, as long as you just go vertically and let the little filament do its thing without scooping this movement, as long as you do that, a big puddle of royal jelly makes it very easy to pick up the larvae. If you're lazy and do a crappy job and you set up, you're going to get crappy cells. That's the bottom line. I think that's true of all things in beekeeping, right? I mean, it's a hobby that requires a lot of work, and if you do it well, the bees do good. Here's our timeline. So your egg is laid, 3.5 days later it hatches, right? Keeping in mind you've only got 4 days from that dew point on for the queen to get its 1,600 feedings. So you really want that larvae as close to when it hatches as you can possibly get. Certainly you don't want a larvae that's much more than about 12 hours old, right? So you want to get it as close to being hatched as you can. As soon as a little bit of royal jelly, you pick up, chuck it in your cells. So that we're going to call grafting day 1, but really it's day 1 of the hatch, right, which is day 3.5 to 4. So you put that in your cell starter. Your cell starter hive is going to build out those cells by giving those larvae a little bit of royal jelly, building a little rim of wax. I'm going to show you all this, don't worry. About 12 to 24 hours later, you can just put those cells into a different queen right colony over a queen excluder, and you'd call that colony the finishing colony. I don't do that. I do the Michael Palmer 10/10 combined starter finisher. Again, I'm going to go through that really carefully for you. But it essentially uses exactly the same hive. It's temporarily separated in the middle of the process and then recombined as a finisher. Day 10 after your graft, so your cells, your little baby bees are now 14 days old, right? 14 days since she was laid, 10 days since you grafted. Keep in mind that queens hatch on day 16. So day 10, you got to get those fully capped cells into your mating nukes. You really only have a day or two till they hatch. And it may even hatch sooner than that if it's a really warm weather. You might get a 15-day hatch, maybe a 17-day hatch, depends on the weather. But day 10 after the graft, they need to be going into your mating nukes or your requeening colonies, or whatever you're going to choose to do with them. All right, so our queen cell starters, we're looking to take advantage of both the emergency and the swarming response, right? We're packing them with a stupendous amount of bees. In the case of the way I'm doing it with the Michael Palmer technique, I'm putting 10 frames of cat brood into one box. And then 10 days later, I'm going to graft into that box. At that point, all of those 10 frames have hatched. That is an immense number of very young nurse bees. That's exactly what we want. On top of that, we're feeding them 2-to-1 syrup and pollen for 2 straight weeks up until the graft and then 5 days after the graft. So there's an abundance of food coming in. You've got far too many bees in the box, and then you're suddenly going to make them queenless by taking away the bottom box that the queen's in, right? And so effectively, you've triggered the swarming and emergency response simultaneously, but you've done that in a setting where your nurse bees are optimally fed so they're able to produce as much royal jelly as they could produce for that critical 4-day, 1,600 feed job they've got to do for your queen cells. All right, you do need some pollen in there. I mean, queen bees also need protein, and your nurse bees need protein to pull that off. So you're going to put a solid frame of pollen, one of the best frames you can find across your apiary, on each side of your graft. So you've got your 10 frames of brood, they've all hatched out by now. You go through and you check, make sure there's no bloody queen cells on there, because that would be a disaster. And then you put your graft right in the center of it with 2 frames of pollen, one on each side. If you're using a separate finisher, so if at the 24-hour mark you're pulling your grafting frame out and chucking that into another finishing colony, you could actually just keep putting grafts into your starter, and those nurse bees are able to do several rounds, 200 maybe. If you're doing rounds of 40 or 50 cells at a time, you could probably get 3 or 4 rounds out of a starter. I don't do it that way because, number one, I don't have enough equipment to do 200 nucleus colonies simultaneously, nor do I need that many. And number two, I just have, it's really all it is, really just lack of space and need. I just don't need that many nucleus colonies. So I just do 50 to 100 nukes at a time. All right. We talked about why young bees, right? We talked about the fact that they have hyperpharyngeal mandibular glands. They're going to produce the most ability to feed that queen optimally when they're between 0 and 12 days old, and that feed is absolutely critical to the development of your queen. And there's some studies here to back this up. So I have said all these things more than once, and why is because it's super important for the quality of the queens you produce. So it turns out that the amount of feed that's given to your queen has a direct impact on the size of your queen, and more importantly, the size, volume, and quality of her spermatheca, which is basically her little storage sac for sperm. The smaller and crummier that is, the less sperm she can store, which means the less output she can give you as a queen. And the size and volume and storage capacity of the spermatheca is directly related to the nutrition and the size of your queen. And this has been studied up the wazoo. So here's some studies to back that idea, where researchers have shown that the emergence weight of your queen has a direct correlation with the diameter, the volume, and the amount of the spermatheca and the amount of sperm that spermatheca can store. And for a long time, it's been argued that the size and weight of your queen should be a selection criteria. I don't weigh queens because I don't hatch virgins and then put virgins into nukes, but these big queen rearers, I guess, are doing quality assurance by doing just that. They're hatching virgins and weighing them. And it looks like 200 milligrams is about the cutoff where they think anything less than that's kind of crummy. Anything over 200 is probably going to be a pretty decent queen. So all of us talk about nutrition and making sure that your setup is absolutely critically done and done well. It's really important, right? Because it has a direct bearing on the quality of your queen, the size of her spermatheca, and her ability to store sperm. She can't store sperm. She's not going to be much of a queen for you. Where's the spermatheca? It's this little ball thing that sits above the oviduct on your queen. So the oviduct is just upstream from the vagina of the queen, and it's sort of your temporary storage spot for sperm. So she goes out and mates. Actually, queens discard most of the sperm that's put inside of them. Some of it goes into the oviduct temporarily, and some of it's stored up in the spermatheca. So if you have a little crummy queen with a small spermatheca, she's not going to be able to store much sperm. So here's a picture on the bottom there of what a virgin queen spermatheca looks like. It's that little crystal ball looking thing. It has a little net over the top of it called the tracheal net. And once the queen has been mated, the spermatheca takes on that sort of opaque or almond color. All right, we talked about stumpers versus quality queen cells. These are what quality queen cells look like when they're capped. Have a look at the tops. Just take the bottom row of queen cells there. Take the one in the center there. Have a look at the plastic cup and amongst the wax, and you'll be able to see it's white. It's white because even though these queens are 10 days old and about to be going into nukes, they haven't been able to eat all the royal jelly that's inside those cups. So you know your queen is optimally fed because she hasn't even consumed all the royal jelly that was given to her. That's what you want. You don't want crappy little stumpers. I think I have a picture later of what little crappy stumpers look like. And I made those crappy little stumpers too, early on when I was just getting started queen rearing. And I also tried rearing queens when the bees weren't ready to do it. So I tried doing it later in the summer. And spring bees, the nurse bees in spring have a much better ability to produce queens than worker bees later in the season. So you want not only young bees, you want them early in the season. All right, cells are not queens. Making cells, pretty easy. If you do the setup properly, you get pretty decent quality cells. Getting mated queens is not so easy. So you do have to load the deck, like we talked about earlier. Try and flood your mating yards with drones from good hives. Remove all the crummy genetics in the area as best as you can. You can't do a perfect job of that, but do what you can. I'm lucky that I have a chemical-free yard at Bob's place to raise queens, which is a nice place to do it. How about that? 70s porn music. Another one of these little wave files I managed to put on here. All right, so we'll get that off of there. That's what it looks like, the business anyway. So you purposely manipulated to the best of your ability your drone pool. What happens next? So you've got your queen cells, you put them in your mating nukes, you've done the best you can to control the drone pool in that particular area by killing off crappy drones, hopefully by requeening your neighbors' yards if that's appropriate, and by propagating drones intentionally in your best hives. What happens next? DCAs are drone congregation areas. These are where your virgin queen's going to fly to and meet up with her suitors. And there's lots of them. So drone congregation areas are these distinct locations. They're in the air. They're not on a tree or something. These are 15 to 60 meters off the ground. They're high. And there can be literally tens of thousands of drones from tons and tons of hives all over the place at these very large drone congregation areas. And your virgins find those areas. Have a guess how they find them. Pheromones. They find them by pheromones, like everything else in the bee world. So the boys stink and the girls find them. That's how it works. So the idea of these DCAs in the wild is that this massive genetic diversity in one place. Your queen goes through their mates with tons of different drones, could be up to 50 or more drones, that she's getting a mixture of sperm and hence genetic diversity that way. That's the one part of this we can't really control. You do the best you can, but there could be anyone's drones at the DCA. That's why artificial insemination is kind of appealing to me because it gives you even more control over that. I think that's the last one, sorry. All right. So virgin queens, they take a bunch of flights. They do that once the exoskeleton is dry and matured. That's about day 5 after the hatch, something like that. And they fly maybe once, maybe a bunch of times. They'll mate with a ton of different drones. She actually gets rid of most of the sperm that's deposited inside of her, but some of it does get stored. And again, that comes down to the volume of her spermatheca, and that depends on her nutrition as she's being developed, right? So all of it's pretty important. So keep in mind that she's going to store sperm that she's going to use for the next 4 or more years if she survives that long. Artificial insemination equipment, I haven't done this yet, but this really appeals to me just because it's part of the hobby that I can't control and I'd quite like to be able to. So this is how it works. You have this apparatus, the queen is anesthetized with carbon dioxide, and then you've harvested semen from, it looks absolutely barbaric. You've harvested semen from the drones, and then you inject them directly into the vagina of the queen, and then you are going to have a mated queen with the genetics you're looking for. I haven't done this yet. I think it's a course I have to take. I haven't looked into it much yet. This year's kind of crazy with the kids, so we'll see what next year holds. All right, so how do I do it? 2 styles of starters we talked about. The first is the double nuke box. This is what it looks like. It's just 2 crappy nukes are nailed together. It's screened all in the bottom, and you have to do that because you're going to put 15 frames or 10 or 15 frames of bees in this tiny little box with 4 frames of food and 1 frame of cat brood in the middle. You leave them queenless for 24 hours, and then you chuck your grafting frame into the middle of it. The trouble with this, hopefully you guys can figure out the trouble with this. Yes, you're shaking 10 to 15 frames of brood bees, which are nurse bees, into this box, but you have no idea how old they are. I mean, they could be all 12 days old. They probably aren't, right? There's probably a mixture, but they could be quite old. You don't want old ones. You want young nurse bees, tons and tons of young nurse bees. So that's what that little thing looks like. That's how I tend to graft, either early or late when there's not a whole ton of brood resources. It's not my favorite way of doing it, let's just say that. So you chuck a whole bunch of them in there, you fed the donor hive with your syrup, and that's the case no matter how you set up your starter. I think you should be feeding your donor hives, so where you're getting your graft from. So your queen you're going to take the larvae from, feed that hive for a good 10 to 14 days beforehand with syrup so that those nurse bees are able to produce a ton of mandibular and hypopharyngeal secretion to feed that larvae. So as soon as it hatches on day 3.5, it's got a good pool of royal jelly, so it's going to be easier for you to scoop out. So this is it. This is the big one, Michael Palmer's technique. So imagine, if you will, a double deep hive. In the bottom, you've got your queen with all of her brood and her bees. And hopefully this queen's on the brink of swarming already. A very strong colony is what you're looking for. You're going to take into the top box. You could even put a super in there as well if you wanted to. You could put a queen excluder and then chuck a medium super if you wanted to have some area for them to store stuff. And then on top of that, you've got a deep hive body with 10 full frames of cat brood. And I take as many cat frames out of the bottom from that queen as I can, and I give her frames of comb or foundation just so that she's got somewhere to lay and try and decompress her need to swarm. Because obviously we're going to add 10 frames of cat brood to a very strong colony already, and we're going to feed it, and that's going to trigger swarming. So that's basically how it works. I told you how I set it up. 10 frames of cat brood, you put syrup and pollen on it, you've got a queen excluder underneath that, and then your queen right colony below that. Keep checking it for queen cells because she'll want to swarm with that many bees, right? Over that 10 days, you're giving her a ton of nectar and pollen. At the 10-day mark, so now you've triggered the swarming response, right? Too many bees, too much food, not enough space. They're backfilling the brood nest. So you've triggered the swarming response. We now want to trigger the emergency response. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove the bottom section below the queen excluder, right? So that's the bottom deep box. It has our queen in it and whatever bees she might happen to have at that moment. We're going to take her and the bottom board, and we're going to move her a few feet, wherever you've got another space in the apiary, and chuck a top on it, put an inner cover and an outer cover on her, and leave her over there. So now she's sitting over there happy in a little 10-frame box on her own. And what you're left with now is your grafting box, right, which has 10 frames of baby bees in it, because they're 10 days old now. They've hatched out of their cat brood. You put a new baseboard down in exactly the same location the original hive was, the exact same orientation, so pointing the same direction. You put your 10-frame box of nurse bees on there. And so why do that? Well, now any foraging bee that's out is going to return. Any bees that leave your queen right colony that you just moved somewhere else, that's not their home. Their home's back over here, right? So they'll fly back to your grafting box, making it even more packed, right? So you keep feeding it. The next thing you do is go through each one of those frames in your grafting box. Just make absolutely sure there's no queen cells. There shouldn't be, right? 10 days later, there shouldn't be. Make sure. Make absolutely sure. You can even add more bees to that box. So go back to your queen right hive, pick up some frames of bees, make sure you haven't got the queen, for God's sake, and shake more bees into your grafting box, right? So more bees. Just leave enough with the queen that she's got some bees to look after whatever resources they have there, a couple of frames of brood, whatever. She'll be fine. She's only going to be like that for a couple of days, or for 5 days actually. So now what have you done? You've got a box in the same orientation of the original hive, but no queen. They're hopelessly queenless. They have way too many bees. All of those bees have just hatched because we put cat brood in 10 days ago, right? And you're feeding them, and you're giving them pollen, and you've shaken some extra bees in from your other hive. So you've triggered both the emergency response, the queenless, and the swarming response because they have way too many bees and too much food. So that's the setup. That's the situation you want. I leave them that way for about 24 hours. You don't have to. You could leave them like that just for a matter of an hour or two. For me, it just tends to be something I do after work. I tend to set it up after work, and in the morning I go and graft or whatever it might be. So that's it. You put your grafting frame in either a few hours later or the next morning. So you go right into the middle of that box. You take 2 of your now empty frames out, or 3 of them actually, 3 of your empty frames out, right? Shake the bees back into the box. Take your now 3 empty combs out, put 2 pollen frames in, and you put your grafting frame with your cells that you've freshly grafted all your larvae into, straight in the middle of those 2 pollen frames, put the syrup feeder back on, chuck a pollen patty on, close it up. About 12 to 24 hours later, you'll be able to see which cells have been accepted. That's what they look like. This is literally about 12 to 24 hours later. So if you glance along the cell bars, you'll see the little plastic cups with nicely built out wax rims, right? You can see a couple of that. Look at the bottom row, far left. You see that cell? They didn't accept that larvae. There was something wrong with my grafting technique, or the larvae was flipped, or whatever it was. But you can see if you look around, about 85 to 90% of those cells have been accepted. So if we were to tip that frame upside down, you'd see inside each one of those little cups a little puddle of royal jelly with a little larvae happily laying in there. So at this point, you have a choice to make. You can now take that frame and put that into a separate colony, a finishing colony. And a finishing colony isn't anything fancy. It's just a regular double deep colony with a queen excluder in between, with the queen at the bottom. Chuck your frame in there and I'll make finished cells for you. I don't do that because I think the Michael Palmer technique is useful. You've got all these young bees. Why not use them to keep feeding until these cells are completely capped? You know what I mean? You could go and put that into another cell. That physiologically doesn't make as much sense to me. You've already got a ton of these young, healthy nurse bees in this box. You know, to me, I guess probably because the big boys are raising cell after cell, or frame after frame after frame after frame with the same cell starter. I don't do that. I've got the luxury of only doing 1 or 2 frames at a time. So I just leave them in the cell starter exactly as it is, queenless, and I leave them like that until day 5. You actually could, if you wanted to, recombine right now. That's another option. So you simply bring your queen right colony back, stick it under the queen excluder on top, put this box on top of it, and now you've got a very strong finishing colony to finish it off right away. Excuse me. You can either do it now or you can do it in a day or 2 at day 5, makes a difference. By day 5, your cells are capped, right? Your queen cells are capped, the nutrition portion of it's over. So all of this work that you've done, setting up your donors and your starters and all the rest of it, feeding everybody, it's all come to fruition because now you have day 5 capped, big, fat, chunky cells. You with me? And then on day 6 to 10, you can harvest them. I tend to do it on day 10 because there's always a million bloody things to do in April and May for me with the bees. Queen rearing's a mountain of work, particularly if you're doing it on a relatively big scale. I mean, mine's not a big scale, obviously, but for me, when I'm working full time, it's a lot of work. So there's always stuff to do. So I wait till day 10 and I chuck them into their nukes. So again here, like I'm just saying in the Michael Palmer technique, you can just combine your 2 parts of the hive back together. You start at 24 hours, you could do it day 2, 3, 4, 5, makes no difference. You're just aiming to recombine the hive at some point and have your nurse bees finish those cells off. Keep feeding them. Day 6, you got your capped cells, you can harvest them anytime thereafter. So here's some stumpers on the left. Have a look at these little crummy, crappy queen cells on the left. Those are ones that I've made at some point in the past. And look at the plastic. Look at the top row because you can see there's no bees up there. Number 1, the cells are little and midgy and crappy. And number 2, every one of those little plastic cups is devoid of royal jelly. So those queens will hatch and they'll get mated and you'll get eggs out of them for a short while. I mean, maybe they'll last a year or 2. I don't think they're close to as good a queens as you get from the cells on the right. All right. So I talked earlier, there's lots of things you can do with your cells, put them in all different spots. You can put them into mating nukes, mating castles, whatever you choose. You have to consider the temperature, right? Spring nukes, you need to put more bees into because it's colder. Summer nukes, you can get away with a bit of a smaller nuke because they don't have so much cold to deal with. Try not to make too many skinny nukes up. I realize I'm going really slow, so I'm going to speed up here. Sorry, I didn't realize it was so late. Don't make up tons of little skinny nukes. You're much better off with big chunky nukes and make less of them. Here's how I make up nucleus colonies. So I've got 5 frame nucleus boxes with a gallon a gallon frame feeder with 3 frames. Those are foundation frames. Those are what I'm going to replace into the cells, into the hives that I'm stealing brood from. All right, so in there goes a cat brood, an open brood, a feed frame. They get a pollen patty or a little piece of pollen patty, and they get about a gallon and a half, 2-to-1 syrup. That's how I set up all my nukes. There's a couple of weeks later, you pull the frame feeder, you give them another couple of frames of foundation, and they build out, and then they're ready to go. Here is you can see this central divider in the middle. The white on the right-hand side of the picture is the box above. This is a double nucleus colony. This is how it overwinters, the 4/4/4 frames. This is the bottom box. You can see there's 3 frames in there with a cell in between frame 1 and 2, one that I've grafted there. Here's a queen being released out of a mating nucleus colony into a big hive to requeen it. This is my son Elijah with his little beehive, and that's the brood pattern that came from this queen that we grafted. So all the work pays off if you do it. I'm sorry that took so long, guys. That's the end of the talk. Now what do I do? Do I stop sharing the screen here, Bill?
Yeah, just hit stop share.
Sorry that took so long. I didn't realize I was talking so much.
That's all right. That was very thorough. I got a recording over there, so when I put it on YouTube, I can watch it at half speed so I can catch everything.
Sorry, mate. I talked too much.
That was about everything you need to know. Everything. That was great. Very comprehensive. That's why I like having you talking about this stuff. Don't miss a thing.
It all makes sense to me if you tie it all together why each little aspect of it is so important, because you're ultimately looking for a well-fed queen. If you understand why, then you know how, and once you've got how, you can get to pulling it off, you know?
That's right.
Right.
But anyway, so I promised I was going to give this thing away here at this meeting. So I've got my thing in gallery view. So if Aaron, if you pick a number, we've got 29 people watching. So if you pick a number between the first 2 or me, so you can't pick 2. So between 3.
Which one's me? Because my wife wants to tell.
Between 3 and 29.
17.
17.
My wife's birthday.
Yonette Klein. All right. This is yours. I'll get a hold of you later about it.
Yo, Nat, you owe me $20. Anyone got any questions? Sorry that went so long, guys. I didn't realize it was so late.
The only thing that, and I might have missed it, I don't think I did, is on your cell starters, do you have open entrances on your cell starters?
The bottom entrance is open, yeah. Yep. Are you talking about before or after the queen is separated?
We'll typically run excluders on ours because we have had issues in the past where virgins will come in before day 5 and start tearing cells down.
Yep, you're absolutely right. That's certainly a risk. You can get a rogue virgin fly back into your cell starter. So there's no upper entrance on the cell starters. The bottom entrance is open. So I was saying, you mean before or after the the hive was divided? So in the beginning, when you've got your queen right section underneath your queen excluder, then the bottom entrance is open so those foraging bees can come and go. Once you take your queen right section away, you're left with just your grafting box that your graft goes into, so just your 10 frames of bees. There's no entrance period on that hive. There's just the bees locked in for 24 hours with your graft. And at the 24-hour mark, you have that decision to make whether you pull your grafting frame to it somewhere else or whether you recombine and do the combined finisher and starter, which is what I do. And then any virgin that happens to be sorry enough to walk back in gets greeted by a mated queen in the bottom box.
Right.
I don't have. You're absolutely right. I've had exactly the same thing happen. I've had that happen with queen castles too, which it's bloody frustrating. It's one of the things I don't like about queen castles. The little 2-frame sections are so close to one another. The virgin flies out one and comes back mated through another. And the 2 mated queens fight, and invariably they either both die or one dies, the other one's injured. So yeah, it's not an ideal situation. I think probably the best way to get the mating nukes is to have them widely spread out. But I just don't have the time or manpower for that. You know what I mean? I need a helper. I don't have it. Anyone want to come volunteer?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. But like you had said earlier, do fewer stronger ones, and you're going to be, farther along in the end.
Yeah, because they build up nicely, give you a honey crop. They do better for winter. That little nucleus colony of Elijah's built up from a nuke into 2 double deeps and gave us a super of honey in 1 year, which is obviously exceptional. They don't all do that, but that was an exceptional queen. She's actually going to be queen mother this year. She's one of the 3 queens I selected.
Nice.
she's gone through 2 winters, and she gave us 4 or 5 boxes of honey last year. She was fantastic.
Good, good. That's saying a lot for last year.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
On that note, I do the same thing with my queens. Is I'll put a queen excluder on the bottom, right on the bottom board, then put the boxes on top of that, because I've seen it where they do come in and get them. The only thing that I watched in your presentation that bothered me is you got on your cardboard new boxes, you put duct tape.
Yep, I do.
That drives me nuts because that stuff doesn't come off. I like to reuse my cardboard new boxes. Painter's tape works great. So
it's actually a good idea. So I actually never thought about it because I don't have, people don't bring the nuke boxes back to me. I just people take them and that's the end of it, you know. And I'm duct taping them just so that people don't get bees flying around in the car. Because the very first nuke I got years ago, I got from Ray. You know Ray Lowe?
Yeah.
I don't know if you hear Ray. If you are, g'day, mate. I got a nuke from Ray, and the bloody things got loose in my car, and I'd never kept bees before. So I'm hammering down the throughway, screaming like a crazy person, leaning out the window. There's fucking bees piling out my car. I'm sure I was going to be on the news. I had my bee suit on. I was terrified, you know. And so that experience left a lasting impression on me. So now when people come to pick up their nukes, they often come, they're newbies, they don't know what they're doing. They come in a hatchback with their wife. Hey, this is my new hobby. We're getting my bees today. I don't want them getting loose in their car, you know. So that's why I take them up like that. You're right. It's not a very useful thing to do from a reusable viewpoint, but I figure they're just going to chuck them in a box and then throw the cardboard away. Geez, it'd save me a bunch of money if they bring the bloody things back, but it's too much to ask people to do that. $10 with a cardboard.
well, anybody else got there any questions?
Hopefully people are going to give this a crack because it's actually super fun.
It sounds very overwhelming to somebody that hasn't tried it, but even like you said earlier, even if you try it at a smaller scale and just enough to keep, you know, replace your numbers through the year, it takes your beekeeping just to a whole nother level. The knowledge that you learn from trying to graft and raise your own queens will take your beekeeping to a whole nother level. Whether you do it again or not, it makes you a much more well-rounded beekeeper.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think probably my presenting skills are not as good as they should be. It's kind of my personality to love minutia. That's why I went into medicine, became a doc. I just love details, you know. And so I'm probably not very good at presenting because I probably threw so much at you guys that does sound overwhelming. It's actually not. I got started in doing this after watching a couple of YouTube videos, and I was crappy at it to begin with, and I stuck with it, and I got better at it. It's like anything. It seems overwhelming or anything. Learning Spanish seems greatly overwhelming to me, but I'm getting it slowly. You know, it's just like anything. You get started, you give it a crack. It's really a fun thing. I hope people give it a try. I'm happy to help out if anyone's got any questions.
Yeah. No, I think you did an awesome job. Your presenting skills are perfect.
Cheers.
You did a very good job.
Agreed. All right. Well, I guess if nobody's got any questions, we'll be back here fourth Monday of next month. And
one quick
it?
question.
All right.
And you may have answered it, and I apologize if you have, but was this recorded?
Yes.
No idea.
It was on.
Okay,
it's streamed to Facebook Live, so you'll be able to go right over to Facebook later on and rewatch it all.
Thank you very much.
Don't say anything negative. I'm a delicate flower. I get my feelings hurt really easy. That's not true. I've got kids. I'm no longer a delicate flower. My teenager calls me old and bald. I'm no longer delicate.
Yep. So, all right. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Next time.
See you later on, guys.